My name is Rani and this is a curly bookworm. I am so excited for today's video simply because I like to watch this. I like watching so many channels and watching what everybody is recommending as their top 10. And so yeah, this is a video where I will tell you top 10 books that I have read this year. Let's go. So before we begin, there are two things to keep in mind. The first one is that these books weren't published this year. These books were the books that I've read this year. So it could have been published whenever, okay? It's just that they are my favorites from what I read this year. The second thing to keep in mind is that mostly it's kind of not in order. I'm going to go from 10 to 1-ish. But honestly, the ones that are probably in order are 3 to 1 rather than the rest between 10 and 4. They're kind of interchangeably like not in order. Like I'm not rating them or ranking them because they're like my children and I like all of them. So let's begin with one of my favorite authors, Anne Patchett. I have loved her writing ever since I discovered her writing. There's some like soul to her writing that I really like. So this book is called Tom Lake, and Tom Lake is something that I listened to, which was a bonus because Meryl Streep narrated it. I mean, excuse me, Meryl Streep narrating an audiobook is just so good, so good. So the protagonist's name is Lara and she lives on a farm. And she has a husband and 3 daughters, and her 3 daughters are visiting from wherever they live, and they've come back to the farm because it's COVID and they have nothing else to do but be at home quarantined, and they have barely any sort of contact with the world outside. And they are cherry picking. It's cherry picking season, and so whether there's COVID, there's no COVID, whatever's going on, they are cherry picking. And while they're cherry picking, some stories about Lara and her youth get told. Hi, say hi to my little kitten. Can you see her in frame? Hi. 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 What's up? Alright, so where was I? Right, so Lara and her family are cherry picking, and in the middle of all of this, it's kind of boring, it's kind of dull work. So they start talking about Lara's very eventful career in her youth, which is that she was an actress and she was sort of on her way to become a really, really big time actress in Hollywood. The lovely thing about this book is, as always, Anne Patchett's narrative voice. The way she tells a story is wonderful, and like I said, the bonus is if you listen to it as an audiobook, you get Meryl Streep in your ear. And now I feel like when I'm talking about Lara, the protagonist, I'm actually thinking about Meryl Streep, which is insane. But what I also loved about it, the book itself and the story itself, is that it's kind of like a coming of age story, but intermingled with this relationship, because they go back and forth in the narrative. And so they do talk about what happened in Lara's sort of 20s when all of these cool things happened to her, but they also talk about like the intricacies of the relationships between the girls, the sisters, and the mother and the daughters, and the father and the daughters, and all of that fun stuff. And I just thought it was really beautifully told as a story, and I would 100% recommend it to you. Okay, so the next book that I want to recommend to you guys is Jade City by Fonda Lee. I have not read good fantasy in a while, and last year I feel like it was very hit and miss for me, especially with fantasy, but this one was great because think like Godfather set in like Japan or like Korea or something like that. South Korea, not North Korea, but something like that. Very, very interesting sort of setup. We're looking at the story being set up in a place called Kekon, which is an island, and they have these magical powers of particularly strength, but a lot of other things as well. And not all of them, it's just the Greenbone clans. Now the Greenbone clans are people who specifically, when they wear jade, are able to sort of suck up energy from the jade, and this is very special jade that is only to be mined in Kekon, not anywhere else in the world. So at one point in their history, foreigners are kind of trying to invade Kekon and take over, and so the Greenbone clans get together and they kind of hold them back. And at that point, they're not rivals. At that point, they're best friends and they get along and all of that. But at some point, they split up the green bones I mean, and they become rivals. And then starts this whole like who owns the city war. And when we start the book, we're actually in the middle of that, and we find out what is the backstory, what's happened, what is the world like, what are their powers like. There's a great setup in terms of each of the characters that they introduce. There's a lot of depth. It was just a completely beautiful experience because you were exposed to this whole world the authors created. And so apart from the story itself, you had a lot of beautiful and rich world building. And so yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. I rated it a 5 on 5. I would definitely recommend that you pick it up. Okay, the next book that I want to talk about is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. He's a guy who also wrote The Martian, if you've read that or if you've watched it. Superb book. I cannot even tell you. It is super pacey, and for something that's super sciencey and super nerdy and in a sense like super geeky, I can't believe how quickly I read this book. So this book begins with a person who is, you know, in a spaceship, and he is kind of unconscious, and he wakes up and he doesn't know where he is, and he kind of discovers that he's on a spacecraft, and he's like, okay, what's going on, because he can't remember anything. He's lost all memory. He sees some not alive crew around him, so he is kind of struggling to figure out, who am I? Where am I going? Am I going to a mission? Am I coming back from a mission? And he's completely lost. And so the book kind of takes you back and forth in narrative to reveal to you, the audience, where he was from. Obviously not reveal too much, and then kind of bring you back, and then it'll tell you what's going on, how's he discovering who he is and what he's thinking about, and so on and so forth, right? So yeah, it's a great book. There are some characters that are amazing in this book, which I'm not going to tell you because it's going to be a spoiler. Anyway, I rated this book 5 on 5 and I would highly recommend it. The next book that I want to talk about is this one. This is Tommorow by Gabriel Zevin. It's wonderful cover, isn't it? I mean, it was all over the internet. You couldn't have missed it. It is such a beautiful cover, and it's a beautiful story too. It is about Sam and Sadie, who are best friends. They meet when they're really young. The book actually starts when Sam and Sadie haven't really been talking to each other for a while, and they kind of run into each other, I think in Massachusetts, in a subway, and they kind of like look at each other across the room, and then they start talking, and then there's this whole relationship and friendship that builds, and it's beautiful because it is a story about the ages. It's about obviously coming of age, but also these guys together build great video games and this whole empire of like things that they build together. It takes you through many years, and the evolution of a friendship, of partnership within a business that they create, the dynamics of that, and there are other really cute, sweet characters within the story as well. Some of the things the author has described, some of the metaphors used, some of the language that she has used to talk about things is just honestly so beautiful. There was this one chapter with one of the characters in it towards the end. I won't tell you what it is, but it was so beautiful. It felt like poetry. If you've read this book and you know which chapter I'm talking about, comment and tell me, and let's talk, either here on YouTube or on Instagram. This is the next book that I want to talk about. This is Women Holding Hands by Myra Kalman. I absolutely adore her books. Like, this is her second book that I'm reading, and I was just so impressed. It's just amazing. I have to show you some pages. You'll understand why I love it. So this isn't necessarily like a fiction book, or like there's not some great thing happening in it. There's no plot, there's no characters, there's no all of that, but it's simply illustrations, these paintings about different women holding up things, and it could be a hat, or it could be the trouble of the family, it could be the respect of, you know, her husband, it could be whatever, but it's beautiful. I can't explain it to you, just trust me and read it or try and review it on Google Books or something like that. The beauty of this book is the art in it and just how cool some of the things that she says about these women and how she interprets women holding things. I have a crush on this lady. I have a crush on Myra Kalman because, like, this is so funny. It says irritated woman holding up giant cabbage. That's funny. Anyhow, really one of my biggest favorites this year. Definitely recommend it. The next book that I want to talk about is That Bonesetter Woman. I have talked about That Bonesetter Woman by Frances Quinn in a different video, but let me talk briefly about it here too. I adored this book. If you've watched that video, you know I already adored it. So the book is about this woman who is from a small town in England, and it kind of opens on her and her sister kind of moving to London for a short while because there's something scandalous that has happened in this small town, and her parents want to put her in another city for a while, and they have an aunt who lives in the city and they are shipped off to the city. The protagonist, Dury, is not at all excited. She is dreading it because back home her father is a bone setter, someone who sets people's bones, and she loves learning from him, although she's a woman and she's not allowed to practice. And now she kind of hopes that after like looking at him and learning, he eventually will give in and, you know, let her practice being a bone setter. But all her plans are like foiled because something happens and she is sent off to London to go and live there for a little bit. It's got very sort of cozy Downton Abbey sort of like space. It's like I said, it's not an estate, it's not people who live in an estate, so don't get me wrong, the story is not similar, but like the vibe, you know, is similar of the space, the time, and all of that lovely stuff. So cozy book, definitely recommend, is definitely one of my favorites this year. Next book that I want to talk about is this one. This is something that I've also recommended to you before in the cozy reads video. It seems like cozy reads are my thing this year. So this one is the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers. I love the series. So there are actually two books. They're tiny books at like 120 or 30 pages each. It's more like a novella, and each of these books are sublime. They're so good. It technically falls in the sci-fi category because there's a robot and because it's kind of set in the future and all of that good stuff, but honestly it's not very sci-fi. There's no science specifically. There's just like a setup where it's a new world. Humanity has overly relied on technology and they've kind of gone past that, and now they are living in a different way. I'm not going to give much away because it's a really tiny book, and if I tell you everything, what are you going to read? But it is about a monk who is a non-binary monk, and they go looking for purpose. A monk who's looking for purpose. Does that even make sense? No, it doesn't. But it's great though. They're having an existential crisis, and they become a tea seller, like a traveling tea seller. So they have this tea shop, and they cycle this like movable tea shop from town to town, and they sell beautiful, amazing tea. And then they meet this robot and things happen. That's all I'm going to tell you, but it is so good. It is so good. Please go read it, please. It's a 5 on 5 for me. So number 3 on this list, it's a self-published book by this author called ML Wong, who has also written another book that I really love called The Sword of Kaigen, or Kaijin, however you pronounce it. So the book that I want to talk to you about today is also self-published. It is called Blood Over Bright Haven. I loved it. I read it on the Kindle, I think, and I'm telling you, it was amazing. Best fantasy, hands down. I know I said I love Jade City, but this beat that by a mile, even though they're both in my top 10 list. So you can imagine how much I love it. If you're into fantasy, please read it. I loved the premise. I love the world, and in general I really enjoy the way this author writes, the way they describe the world, the kind of themes that they pick to talk about. A lot of it in this book has got to do with colonialism, just women's rights, the patriarchy, and how all of this is connected, class issues and all of that. But wait, the premise. I always get to the premise last because I'm busy describing to you why I love this book so much. The premise is very simple. There is this world where it's kind of, there's blight everywhere, and there's this one city that doesn't have the blight, and it's built around like this almost like dome-like situation. And the people who live there are they've escaped the blight, or they've built a sort of like technology where they can actually live safely from the blight and from like all of the dangers in the outside world beyond the dome. And within this space there are mages, there's witches, so to speak, or mages, right, who do very, very powerful magic, and all of them are men. And so our protagonist is a female protagonist, and she says, you know what, I'm not gonna stand for this. She's extremely intelligent. It takes a lot to become a high mage, and she decides that she wants to be a high mage. There's very, very few high mages, and people are not allowed, women in fact are not even allowed. They're allowed to do this one exam every 10 years, only because the belief is that women don't have what it takes to become a high mage emotionally or intellectually or any of those things. And so she takes the exam, she makes it, she becomes a high mage, and then she discovers a lot about her world. And yeah, I'm trying to hold back. I don't want to tell you much about it. If you're a fantasy book lover or you like the genre, you will love this book, so please go read it. Alright, number 2 on this list for me is A Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia. So this is set in the 1900s in Mexico, in this very small town. This family is sort of, this grandmother who's like a gazillion years old, and nobody even knows how old she is, because this is a magic realism sort of book. It's set in a space where there's not too much magic, but most of the book is like set in a realistic world, but with the realistic, like actual historical backdrop. But at the same time, there's just like a sprinkling of magic, which is beautiful. And I would definitely say, for even those people who don't really like fantasy or magic, like, read this, because this isn't really about the magic itself. It's just the beauty of the story. But anyhow, again, back to the premise. There's this family with this old grandmother who one day just walks off into nowhere and then finds this little boy who is surrounded with bees. When I say little boy, I mean actually an infant, a child, like a day-old child or whatever, who is in this particular part of town, and there's like a whole bunch of bees around him, and he's kind of, his mouth and his face area is kind of not in the right way. He has like a cleft, I think, I can't remember. So there's something wrong with his face, and despite all of that, she kind of carries this child back home, and everybody thinks that he's gonna die because he's been like, we don't know where his mother is. He looks really thin, and like, we don't know if he's gonna survive at the beginning of the book, but he does. Miraculously he does. And they name him Simonopolo, and Simonopolo never talks. He is a quiet boy, but he's a beautiful boy. And at this point, the family, I think they have 2 daughters, and right after Simonopolo is born, and is like raised by this family, I think 5 or 7 or 10 years later, there's a boy who's born. And so the story really goes from the narrator talking about Simonopolo's point of view, and then this child who is born in the family, their point of view as well. And you go back and forth in both of their point of views, and it's rather beautiful, because there's this, it's not about magic, but it feels like magic, because it feels like so much beautiful nostalgia. There's a very, very rich cultural setting and how they think. There's like a backdrop of, different political things that happen during that time, and how this particular family and this particular town sort of survives. It's a very slow book. It's the book that you savor and devour over time. But the one thing that I will say is, take your time with the beginning, be patient, because I actually started this book on the Kindle, and when I started I felt like it was super slow and I kind of stopped. But then I started listening to the audiobook, and the narrator is amazing. Actually, there are two of them. Both of them sort of set up the atmosphere. Like, it's inescapable, the magic of this book. I really don't want to talk about it much more, because really the magic of this book is just following this family, their story, the legacy of Simono, the relationships that Simono has with all of these different, parts of the family. Just go read it. There's not much more I want to tell you and spoil it for you, but please just do yourself a favor and read this book, or even better, listen to it. So this is the last book that I want to talk about. This is These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. I have talked about this before. I love this book. I cannot believe that a non-fiction short essay book has become my #1 favorite book of the year. But well, it is. It was just fantastic. Like I said, Ann Patchett has definitely become one of my favorite authors ever. Like, I can't wait to read more from her. And I think I've said this before as well, her non-fiction seems to be even better than her fiction. I love her essays. I almost feel like her true voice comes out in the essays, and I love her true voice because it's kind of like sitting with her and having a coffee and hearing her talk about some anecdote, some story, something that happened to her and her take on it, and it's beautiful. She covers literally everything here. They're quite casual, the stories, but it's also got a poignant sort of point. She's got a poignant way of saying things. So anything from the fact that she has 3 fathers, her biological father and her 2 stepfathers, or her best friend, or Tom Hanks's assistant, or I don't know, stopping smoking, her husband's hobby of flying. There's just so many topics that she covers. I'm just stunned by how insightful these feel. It feels so personal and so insightful. I 100% recommend it. It is so good. You will not regret it. I've been gifting this to people left, right and center this whole year, just because I feel like it's a gift that everybody should have. It's just so good. And what a great cover, huh? Thank you for watching. Those were my 10 favorites of the year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave your comments here. Come to Instagram and leave your comments. And I will see you in another video soon.